It was early morning at Eleanor Vance's cliffside manor in Port Carmine, where the sea mist clung to the windows like forgotten memories. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, moved with brisk steps, straightening a landscape painting and chiding the young gardener for neglecting the hydrangeas. That day, a car service stopped at the iron gate. A young woman stepped out, clutching a small suitcase. Her name was Lena. She came from far away, from Graycliffe, a village where the wind whistled through the fishing nets and the salt spray crusted on the windowpanes. She hadn't dreamed of being a domestic worker. But life sometimes pushes your feet where your heart doesn't want to go. And besides, it was Reverend Miller who had sent her with a letter of firm recommendation. She is serious, clean, polite. Take her. That's what the note said, which Mrs. Davies had placed before Madame Vance. When Lena entered the house, she was struck by the silence that reigned there. A polished, cold silence, suspended, like a breath held for years. Madame Vance barely glanced at her. Can you cook? Yes, madam. You sleep where you're told. You speak when spoken to. You make no unnecessary noise. Understood? Yes, madam. She turned her back. Thus began Lena's new life. Lena settled into the small room near the kitchen, a windowless space with a simple bed and a small chest of drawers. She carefully placed her bag inside, and at the bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a delicate silver locket. She never wore it. It was a keepsake, an object with no clear explanation. The woman who raised her, Agnes, had simply said, "This was with you the day you were brought to me. Keep it. One day it might mean something." That night, alone in her room, Lena caught her breath. She was 23, neither fragile nor naive. But in this house, something unsettled her. Not a threat, but a feeling. As if the walls were watching her, or her steps were tracing an invisible path. Days passed. Lena learned quickly. She had a quiet way of doing things. She polished Madame Vance's silver with near-religious patience. She learned her preferred tea, her reading habits, even her silences. The other staff found her discreet, kind. But there was something deeper in her, a gravity, as if she carried a past heavier than her years suggested. Madame Vance began to notice this girl more than she intended. At first, it was small things, the way she arranged flowers, the tilt of her head when she listened. Then, her gaze, direct and calm, but unsettlingly familiar. She didn't understand why this young woman irritated her at times and disarmed her at others. She reminded her of someone. But who? One day, Lena was tasked with organizing a neglected escritoire in the library. While sorting through old stationery, her fingers brushed against a small piece of paper, folded 4 times and yellowed by time. She hesitated, then tucked it back into a crevice without a word. But something deep within her had been stirred. For several nights, she dreamed of the sea, a rocky shore, and a feeling of being set adrift. She woke unsettled, and each morning resumed her work as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Davies watched her in silence. She knew, but she waited. One evening as Lena cleared the table, Mrs. Davies stopped her gently. "You look tired, Lena. Are you all right?" "Yes, Mrs. Davies." "Do you think about your family back there?" "I don't know. Sometimes I think I've never really known who my family was." Mrs. Davies paused. "Sometimes family isn't what we think," she said softly. "But the tide always brings back what's been cast out." Lena nodded, but asked no questions. "Not yet." Madame Vance, meanwhile, began to feel different, irritable, tired for no reason. She called a doctor who found nothing. She felt a shift in the very air of her house. Nothing changed until one day, while searching for a document in her safe, she found a small velvet box she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a baby's christening gown, a lock of fine hair, and a faded ultrasound image. A memory from another life. She put it all back quickly, but her heart raced. Why did Lena's face keep coming to mind? That night, she dreamed of a child's weight in her arms, a decision made in fear, and a promise she had forced herself to forget. Meanwhile, in her small room, Lena held the locket between her fingers. She didn't know why, but she felt something approaching. One Saturday, the senior housemaid fell ill. Madame Vance, who disliked disruptions, ordered Lena to clean her private study, a forbidden space where she met with artists and clients. The room was filled with modern art and the scent of expensive perfume. Lena was dusting when an unexpected guest arrived. An elegant, older woman. "Is Eleanor in?" she asked. "I'll fetch her, madam." "No, wait. You're new, aren't you?" "Yes, madam." "What's your name?" "Lena." The woman paused, her gaze lingering. "Lena. A lovely name. Where are you from?" "Graycliffe." "Graycliffe?" the woman murmured. "I know that place. I was there long ago. You look like someone I knew once." A very proud, very lonely woman. Before Lena could respond, Madame Vance entered. "Clarissa, you're early." "I am," the woman replied, her eyes still on Lena. "I was just speaking with your new girl. She's special. She's efficient. That's all that matters to me." "But don't you find it remarkable," Clarissa said, her voice dropping, "how the past never truly stays buried? It has a way of washing up on shore." Awa overheard this, not understanding. She didn't yet know that the whispers between these women spoke, without saying it, of a past she carried in her veins. The tension grew. One afternoon, one of Madame Vance's aunts visited. As she entered, her eyes fell on Lena. She stared, then pulled Mrs. Davies aside. "That girl, she has the Vance look. The same eyes as Eleanor's mother. She's not here by chance." Lena, troubled, decided to visit Reverend Miller. "Why did you send me to that house, Father?" "Because sometimes, Lena, we are guided to where truths lie sleeping. You carry a truth that can no longer be kept buried." When Lena returned, Madame Vance was in the conservatory, watching the sunset paint the ocean orange. "Madam, would you like some tea?" "No," Madame Vance said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Just stay. Sit for a bit." Lena sat. A silence settled, but something passed between them, a recognition in the fading light. "You know," Madame Vance murmured, "I've often dreamed of a daughter. A daughter I could have had. And sometimes I wonder if dreams are memories trying to return." The next morning, Mrs. Davies met Lena in the hall. "She's waiting for you in the study." Eleanor Vance was seated, a small velvet box on the desk between them. She gestured for Lena to sit. A long silence passed. Then, Madame Vance opened the box. She took out the tiny christening gown and the lock of hair. "I carried you," she said, her voice raw. 23 years ago. I held you for one night, not knowing what to do. In the morning, I made you disappear. I was afraid. Ambitious. Your father was gone. So I entrusted you to a woman who promised you a good home, and I swore to forget." She then pointed to the locket Lena always kept hidden. "That locket. I placed it in your blanket. It was mine. When I saw it on you weeks ago, I felt the world tilt. I told myself it couldn't be you." "I've always had it," Lena whispered. Madame Vance closed her eyes. "I never had other children. I watched you here every day without seeing you. And now I have no more excuses." She stood and knelt before Lena. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am only telling you the truth. You are my daughter." Lena felt her hands tremble. Her entire past seemed to realign in that moment. "I don't know what to feel," she said. "But I am here, and I'm listening." That evening, Mrs. Davies cooked a simple, comforting meal. The staff whispered, but Mrs. Davies quieted them. Be kind. Life has a way of coming full circle. Later, Lena knocked on Madame Vance's bedroom door. Come in. Lena entered. I want to know everything. Not to judge, but because I need to understand my own life. And that night, Eleanor Vance spoke of her youth, her fears, her sacrifices. She spoke until her voice was hoarse and her guard had completely fallen. When she finished, Lena stood to leave. She paused at the door. I don't yet know what this means for us, she said. But I know one thing. Mother. Eleanor Vance flinched softly at the word, hearing it for the first time from her daughter's lips. I'm here now, Lena said. And I'm no longer a stranger. A few months later, a quiet change occurred. Lena no longer wore a uniform. She had her own sun-filled room in the house. At her mother's insistence, she began taking courses in art history and gallery management. In her, Eleanor saw not just an heir, but a second chance. In that mended bond, in that slow reconstruction, there was a simple truth. Sometimes roots are severed, and lives are set adrift. But currents change, and what was lost can sometimes, against all odds, find its way home. And in the manor by the sea, once filled with a cold silence, there was now the sound of a future being built. The following months in the Vance manor were a study in careful, quiet negotiation. The word daughter had been spoken, but its meaning was a new landscape they had to map together, step by tentative step. Eleanor, for the first time in her life, found herself unsure. The commanding gallery owner who could silence a room with a glance now hesitated before speaking to the young woman who shared her blood. She started with practicalities, a language she understood. She enrolled Lena in the art history courses, purchased a new wardrobe for her, and had a small, bright office with a view of the sea set up next to her own. These were actions, things she could do, and in doing them, she felt she was building a bridge. Lena accepted these gestures, but with a quiet reserve that unnerved Eleanor. She was grateful, yes, but she was not won over. The ghost of the windowless room near the kitchen still lingered. The other staff, under Mrs. Davies's firm guidance, now called her Miss Lena, a title that felt both foreign and strangely fitting. The deference in their eyes was different now. It was no longer just for the mistress's daughter, but for the woman who had once been one of them and now carried herself with a new, unspoken authority. The true test came during the preparation for the Vance Gallery's annual autumn exhibition, Eleanor's most prestigious event. The featured artist was a volatile sculptor from Berlin, and the stress turned the gallery into a tempest. Eleanor, in her element, was a whirlwind of decisive orders and sharp critiques. Lena observed. She spent her days at the gallery, not as a hostess, but as a student. She saw how her mother commanded respect, but also how she instilled fear. She saw the way the junior curators flinched when Eleanor approached. One afternoon, a crisis erupted. A crucial piece, a massive glass sculpture, had arrived with a hairline crack. The artist was furious, blaming the handlers. The handlers blamed the shippers. Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos, cold and final. It's ruined. The insurance will handle it. We'll pull it from the show. The room fell into a defeated silence. The sculpture was the centerpiece. Lena, who had been studying the piece for days, stepped forward. All eyes turned to her. Mother, she said, the word still feeling new on her tongue. May I? Eleanor, startled by the interruption, gave a curt nod. Lena approached the cracked glass. It's not ruined, she said, her voice calm, carrying a certainty that reminded Eleanor of the girl who could silence a room with her presence. The crack, look at how the light catches it now. It creates a new fracture of light. The piece was about fragility. Now it's about fractured beauty. It's even more powerful. The German artist stopped his ranting and stared. He walked slowly to the sculpture, circling it. A long, tense minute passed. Then, he grunted. The girl is right. He turned to Eleanor. She sees it. It stays. The relief in the room was palpable. Eleanor looked at her daughter, truly looked at her. She saw not a former maid, not a project, but a woman with an innate, perceptive grace she herself lacked. It was a humility born of a different kind of strength. That evening, back at the manor, Eleanor didn't retreat to her study. She found Lena on the terrace, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. "You were impressive today," Eleanor said, joining her at the railing. "It was just an observation," Lena replied. "It was leadership," Eleanor corrected gently. "A kind I've never possessed. I break things to get my way. You mend them to make them stronger." The sea air was cool between them. Lena finally gave voice to the question that had been hanging in the air for months. "Why now? After all these years, why acknowledge me? Was it just the locket?" Eleanor sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 2 decades. "The locket was the proof I couldn't ignore. But it was you, Lena. It was the way you moved through this house. You weren't trying to take anything. You were just present. And your presence became a mirror. I could no longer avoid seeing my own reflection in it, the lonely, fearful woman I had become. I spent my life building walls," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought they protected me. But you walked in, and I realized they were just keeping me imprisoned with my regret." Lena listened, the salt spray misting her face. She thought of Agnes, the woman who had raised her with a simple, sturdy love in Graycliffe. She thought of the long journey that had led her here, to this cliffside, to this complicated woman who was her mother. "Agnes," Lena said softly. "The woman who raised me. She never spoke ill of you. She only ever said that some mothers have to love from a distance." A single tear traced a path down Eleanor's cheek, glinting in the twilight. It was a tear not of pain, but of a profound, unexpected gratitude. "I would like," Eleanor said, her voice firming with a new resolve, "to meet her. To thank her." The autumn exhibition was a triumph. The cracked sculpture was the talk of the art world, praised for its audacious vulnerability. And by Eleanor's side was Lena, no longer a shadow, but a partner. She spoke to guests with an easy warmth that complemented her mother's sharp elegance. They were a pair, a balance. A week after the exhibition, a letter arrived from Graycliffe. Agnes had agreed to visit. The prospect filled the house with a new kind of anticipation, no longer fraught with fear, but with the hope of closing another circle. Lena stood on the terrace, the silver locket now worn openly around her neck, catching the light of the setting sun. The journey was far from over. There were still conversations to be had, wounds to be gently healed. But the silence in the house had been replaced by the sound of waves and the quiet hum of a future being woven, thread by fragile thread, into a whole. She was no longer searching for a place to belong. She was building one. The morning Agnes was due to arrive, the manor was filled with a nervous energy that was entirely new. Eleanor, usually a portrait of composed elegance, was rearranging the same vase of flowers for the 3rd time. "Mrs. Davies, does the guest room have enough blankets? The sea air can be chilly at night." "Yes, Madam Vance. It's perfectly prepared." "And the tea?" "We have the Earl Grey, but perhaps we should have something stronger. Something sturdier." "I have a pot of strong Yorkshire gold ready, madam," Mrs. Davies said, her voice a calming anchor. "And a fine single malt whiskey, just in case." Lena watched the flurry from the doorway, a small, private smile on her lips. This side of her mother, anxious, eager to please, was one she had never seen. It was more revealing than any confession in the study. When the car pulled up, it was Lena who walked out to meet it. Agnes stepped out, her frame still sturdy despite her years, her face a familiar map of kindness and resilience. She looked not at the grand manner, but directly at Lena, her eyes crinkling into a smile. "Lena, my girl." Her voice was like stones smoothing in the tide, warm and rough. "Agnes." Lena embraced her, breathing in the faint, comforting scent of salt air and baking bread that always clung to her. Then Agnes's gaze shifted over Lena's shoulder. Eleanor had appeared on the steps, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The two women, from different worlds, connected only by the young woman standing between them, regarded each other. Agnes was the first to move. She walked forward, not with deference, but with a simple, quiet dignity. "Mrs. Vance," she said, offering a nod. "Miss Price," Eleanor replied, the title formal. Then, her voice softened. "Agnes. Thank you for coming. Please, call me Eleanor." The first hour was stilted, filled with polite conversation about the journey and the weather. They sat in the sunlit conservatory, the tray of tea and whiskey between them like a peace offering. But the real conversation hung in the air, unspoken. It was Agnes who finally broached it. She set her teacup down with a definitive click. "Well," she said, looking from Eleanor to Lena. "We're all here. That's the important thing, isn't it? After all this time." Eleanor stiffened slightly, then nodded. "Yes. It is. I won't pretend it wasn't a shock," Agnes continued, her gaze steady on Eleanor. "Getting Lena's letter. I always knew the day might come. But I'll tell you both the same thing I told Lena when she was a girl asking questions I couldn't answer: what's done is done. The why of it matters less than the what now. Her practicality was a bomb. It cut through the layers of guilt and uncertainty. "Did you?" Eleanor began, her voice hesitant. "Did you ever think of me?" Agnes sighed, a long, weary sound. "I thought of the woman who gave birth to her. I didn't know your name, or your face. But I thought of you. Sometimes with anger, for the child who felt that loss. But more often, I thought you must have been very frightened, or very alone. Happy women don't give away their babies." The directness of it struck Eleanor to her core. There was no judgment in Agnes's tone, only a stark, compassionate truth. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but she did not look away. "I was both," Eleanor whispered. "Frightened and alone." "I know," Agnes said softly. "And look what came of it." She gestured to Lena. "A strong, capable, wonderful woman. However she got here, she's here. And we both had a hand in that." Later, after Agnes had retired to rest from her journey, Eleanor found Lena in the gallery, standing before a new painting, a turbulent seascape. "She's remarkable," Eleanor said, coming to stand beside her daughter. "She is," Lena agreed. "She sees the world in a very simple way. You do what needs to be done. You love the people you're given to love. I feel I need to compensate her." "Give her something," Eleanor said, the art dealer in her surfacing. Lena shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "You can't. And she wouldn't want you to. Your thanks is enough. Your acknowledgement is enough. For her, seeing me here, whole, and seeing you, trying, that is the compensation." The days of Agnes's visit unfolded with a growing ease. Eleanor gave her a tour of the gallery, and Agnes, with her fisherman's daughter eye, pointed to an abstract painting of stormy waves. "Now that," she said, "that feels true. I've seen the sea look just like that right before a squall." Eleanor looked at the painting with new eyes, seeing not just technique, but the truth Agnes named. On Agnes's last evening, the three women ate together in the small, cozy breakfast nook instead of the formal dining room. The conversation flowed freely, stories of Lena's childhood in Graycliffe mingling with tales of the art world. As Mrs. Davies served dessert, Agnes turned to Eleanor. "You'll come to Graycliffe, then? See where she grew up?" The invitation was simple, but it held immense weight. It was an invitation into Lena's past, into Agnes's world. Eleanor looked at Lena, then back at Agnes. "I would like that. Very much." After seeing Agnes off the next day, the manor seemed quieter, but the silence was no longer cold. It was peaceful. Lena found her mother in her study, not working, but simply staring out at the ocean. She asked me to forgive myself, Eleanor said, without turning around. Last night, before she went to bed. She said I was carrying a weight that belonged to the woman I was, not the woman I am. Lena came to stand beside her. She's wise. It's not that simple, Eleanor murmured. No, Lena agreed. But it's a start. She slipped her hand into her mother's. Eleanor's fingers, usually so cool and precise, were warm. They stood there together, watching the relentless, healing sea. The past was not erased, it was a part of them, like the cliffs weathered by the same sea. But the future was no longer something to be feared or controlled. It was simply the next wave, and they would face it together. The story was no longer about a secret discovered, but about a family, unconventional and hard-won, learning how to be. The invitation to Graycliffe hung in the air for a month, a promise both thrilling and daunting. Eleanor Vance, who navigated the cutthroat art world with ruthless precision, found herself unnerved by the prospect of a small, wind-scoured fishing village. She spent the intervening weeks in a flurry of uncharacteristic preparation, asking Lena questions that were less about practicalities and more about the soul of the place. "Will they resent me?" she asked one evening, watching Lena sketch the view from the terrace. Lena didn't look up from her pad. "They don't know you enough to resent you. They know Agnes. They know me. They'll be curious." "Curious," Eleanor repeated, the word tasting foreign. She was used to being known, to inspiring envy or admiration, not simple curiosity. When the day came to drive north, Eleanor chose a simple, elegant linen suit, then changed into trousers and a cashmere sweater, wanting to look approachable but not like she was trying too hard. Lena, watching the uncharacteristic indecision, simply said, "Wear what makes you feel like yourself, mother. They'll see through anything else anyway." The journey was a transition. The sleek coastal highway gave way to narrower, winding roads that snaked through hills dotted with sheep. The air changed, losing the polished scent of the sea for a wilder, peat and salt tang. Graycliffe appeared not as a picture postcard, but as a cluster of sturdy stone houses huddled against the elements, the roar of the Atlantic a constant, booming presence. Agnes was waiting for them outside her whitewashed cottage, its front door a brilliant blue. She greeted Lena with a fierce hug, then turned to Eleanor. Her gaze was assessing but not unkind. "Eleanor. You made it." "The roads are interesting," Eleanor said, her voice tighter than usual. They separate the visitors from the guests," Agnes replied with a hint of a smile. "Come in. The kettle's on." The cottage was small, warm, and filled with the homely smell of baking. There were no valuable artworks, only framed photographs of Lena at various ages, a landscape embroidered by Agnes's own hand, and a simple wooden cross on the wall. Eleanor felt oversized, her city sensibility clumsy in the cozy space. The days that followed were a gentle immersion. Agnes took Eleanor to the village shop, introducing her simply as Lena's mother. The curiosity was palpable, but the greetings were warm. They walked the headland, the wind whipping their words away, and Eleanor felt a strange, profound peace in the face of the raw, untamable landscape. The turning point came on the third day. A fierce gale blew in, grounding the fishing boats and rattling the cottage windows. Lena had gone to visit an old school friend, leaving Eleanor and Agnes alone. They sat by the fire, the silence between them comfortable now, filled by the storm's symphony. "Did you ever want to leave?" Eleanor asked, gazing into the flames. "It's so isolated." Agnes rocked slowly in her chair. "Oh, when I was young. There was a boy from the next village. Thought I'd marry him and we'd go to London." She smiled wistfully. "But he was lost at sea the winter I turned 20. After that, this place didn't feel so small. It felt like a shelter. It felt like home." Eleanor thought of her own youth, of the frantic escape she had engineered from a different kind of confinement. I ran from